This is part 1 of Going Through the Tunnel by Doris Lessing. In this story, a young boy challenges himself by swimming through a dangerous underwater passage. Going to the shore on the first morning of vacation, the young English boy stopped at a turning of the path and looked down at a wild and rocky bay, then over to the crowded beach he knew so well from the other years. His mother walked on in front of him, carrying a bright striped bag in one hand. Her other arm, swinging loose, was very white in the sun. The boy watched that white, naked arm and turned his eyes, which had a frown behind them, toward the bay and back again to his mother. When she felt he was not with her, she swung around. "Oh, there you are, Jerry," she said. She looked impatient, then smiled. "Why, darling, would you rather not come with me? Would you rather—" She frowned, conscientiously worrying over what amusements he might secretly be longing for, which she had been too busy or too careless to imagine. He was very familiar with that anxious, apologetic smile. Contrition sent him running after her, and yet, as he ran, he looked back over his shoulder at the wild bay, and all morning as he played on the safe beach, he was thinking of it. Next morning, when it was time for the routine of swimming and sunbathing, his mother said, "Are you tired of the usual beach, Jerry? Would you like to go somewhere else?" "Oh, no," he said quickly, smiling at her out of that unfailing impulse of contrition, a sort of chivalry. Yet, walking down the path with her, he blurted out, "I'd like to go and have a look at those rocks down there." She gave the idea her attention. It was a wild-looking place, and there was no one there, but she said, "Of course, Jerry. When you've had enough, come back to the big beach. Or just go straight back to the villa if you like." She walked away, that bare arm, now slightly reddened from yesterday's sun, swinging. And he almost ran after her again, feeling it unbearable that she should go by herself. But he did not. She was thinking, "Of course he's old enough to be safe without me. Have I been keeping him too close? He mustn't feel he ought to be with me. I must be careful." He was an only child, 11 years old. She was a widow. She was determined to be neither possessive nor lacking in devotion. She went worrying off to her beach. As for Jerry, once he saw that his mother had gained her beach, he began the steep descent to the bay. From where he was, high up among red-brown rocks, it was a scoop of moving bluish-green fringed with white. As he went lower, he saw that it spread among small promontories and inlets of rough, sharp rock, and the crisping, lapping surface showed stains of purple and darker blue. Finally, as he ran sliding and scraping down the last few yards, he saw an edge of white surf and the shallow, luminous movement of water over white sand, and beyond that, a solid, heavy blue. He ran straight into the water and began swimming. He was a good swimmer. He went out fast over the gleaming sand, over a middle region where rocks lay like discolored monsters under the surface. And then he was in the real sea, a warm sea where irregular cold currents from the deep water shocked his limbs. When he was so far out that he could look back not only on the little bay, but past the promontory that was between it and the big beach. He floated out on the buoyant surface and looked for his mother. There she was, a speck of yellow under an umbrella that looked like a slice of orange peel. He swam back to shore, relieved at being sure she was there, but all at once very lonely. On the edge of a small cape that marked the side of the bay away from the promontory was a loose scatter of rocks. Above them, some boys were stripping off their clothes. They came running, naked, down to the rocks. The English boy swam toward them, but kept his distance at a stone's throw. They were of that coast. All of them were burned, smooth, dark brown, and speaking a language he did not understand. To be with them, of them, was a craving that filled his whole body. He swam a little closer. They turned and watched him with narrowed, alert, dark eyes. Then one smiled and waved. It was enough. In a minute he had swum in and was on the rocks beside them, smiling with a desperate, nervous supplication. They shouted cheerful greetings at him, and then, as he preserved his nervous, uncomprehending smile, they understood that he was a foreigner strayed from his own beach, and they proceeded to forget him. But he was happy. He was with them. They began diving again and again from a high point into a well of blue sea between rough, pointed rocks. After they had dived and come up, they swam around, hauled themselves up, and waited their turn to dive again. They were big boys. Men, to Jerry. He dived, and they watched him, and when he swam around to take his place, they made way for him. He felt he was accepted, and he dived again, carefully, proud of himself. Soon the biggest of the boys poised himself, shot down into the water, and did not come up. The others stood about, watching. Jerry, after waiting for the sleek brown head to appear, let out a yell of warning. They looked at him idly and turned their eyes back toward the water. After a long time, the boy came up on the other side of a big, dark rock, letting the air out of his lungs in a sputtering gasp and a shout of triumph. Immediately, the rest of them dived in. One moment the morning seemed full of chattering boys, the next, the air and the surface of the water were empty. But through the heavy blue, dark shapes could be seen moving and groping. Jerry dived, shot past the school of underwater swimmers, saw a black wall of rock looming at him, touched it, and bobbed up at once to the surface, where the wall was a low barrier he could see across. There was no one visible under him. In the water, the dim shapes of the swimmers had disappeared. Then one and then another of the boys came up on the far side of the barrier of rock, and he understood that they had swum through some gap or hole in it. He plunged down again. He could see nothing through the stinging salt water but the blank rock. When he came up, the boys were all on the diving rock, preparing to attempt the feat again. And now, in a panic of failure, he yelled up in English, "Look at me, look!" And he began splashing and kicking in the water like a foolish dog. They looked down gravely, frowning. He knew the frown. At moments of failure, when he clowned to claim his mother's attention, it was with just this grave, embarrassed inspection that she rewarded him. Through his hot shame, feeling the pleading grin on his face like a scar that he could never remove, he looked up at the group of big brown boys on the rock and shouted, "Bonjour! Merci! Au revoir! Monsieur! Monsieur!" while he hooked his fingers round his ears and waggled them. Water splurged into his mouth. He choked, sank, came up. The rock, lately weighted with boys, seemed to rear up out of the water as their weight was removed. They were flying down past him now into the water. The air was full of falling bodies. Then the rock was empty in the hot sunlight. He counted 1, 2, 3. At 50, he was terrified. They must all be drowning beneath him in the watery caves of the rock. At 100, he stared around him at the empty hillside, wondering if he should yell for help. He counted faster, faster to hurry them up, to bring them to the surface quickly, to drown them quickly. Anything rather than the terror of counting on and on into the blue emptiness of the morning. And then at 160, the water beyond the rock was full of boys blowing like brown whales. They swam back to the shore without a look at him. He climbed back to the diving rock and sat down, feeling the hot roughness of it under his thighs. The boys were gathering up their bits of clothing and running off along the shore to another promontory. They were leaving to get away from him. He cried openly, fist in his eyes. There was no one to see him, and he cried himself out. It seemed to him that a long time had passed, and he swam out to where he could see his mother. Yes, she was still there, a yellow spot under an orange umbrella. He swam back to the big rock, climbed up, and dived into the blue pool among the fanged and angry boulders. Down he went until he touched the wall of rock again, but the salt was so painful in his eyes that he could not see. He came to the surface, swam to shore, and went back to the villa to wait for his mother.